He inherited an abandoned lodge, but when he opened the door, two starving little twins looked up at him and whispered, "Are you our new daddy?" In the silence of the Colorado mountains, one broken man thought he was only claiming land. Instead, he stumbled into a desperate fight for family, faith, and survival. The lodge holds more than memories. It hides a letter, a promise, and a secret that could shatter everything. But just as hope flickers, danger rides in. A ruthless company claims the land. The law slams its cell doors, and the twins are torn. Away for the orphan train. Dust on the street. The clang of jail keys. The whistle of a departing engine. Will this lonely drifter rise as the father they prayed for, or lose the only family he's ever had? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Colorado highlands as William Hawley guided his horse up the steep mountain trail. His weathered hands gripped worn leather reins, shoulders aching from the weight of years spent hunting buffalo across the plains. Patches of stubborn snow clung to the north-facing slopes, forcing his mount to pick its way carefully between the melting drifts. The letter that had brought him here crinkled in his coat pocket. William could hardly believe his uncle, a man he'd met only twice as a boy, had left him anything at all, let alone a hunting lodge tucked away in these remote hills. His tired eyes scanned the rugged landscape, hoping this inheritance might offer the peace that had eluded him since leaving his violent past behind. "Easy there," he murmured as his horse stumbled slightly on loose shale. The animal's flanks were dark with sweat from the climb, and William could feel its labored breathing. He gave the horse's neck a gentle pat, more for his own comfort than the animal's. The sun was setting when they finally crested the ridge. William drew his mount to a halt, taking in the sight below. There, nestled in a small clearing, stood the lodge. It was a sorry sight, wooden shutters hanging askew, stone. Chimney partially collapsed, roof sagging like a worn-out saddle. The surrounding pines pressed close, their branches reaching toward the building as if nature itself was trying to reclaim it. Silence fell heavy around them, broken only by the soft nickering of his horse and the whisper of wind through the trees. No birds called. No small creatures stirred in the underbrush. The stillness felt expectant, like the pause before a storm breaks. William dismounted stiffly, his boots crunching on patches of old snow. He led his horse to a sturdy post near the lodge's entrance, securing the reins with practiced hands. The building's rough-hewn logs showed signs of weather damage, but the core structure seemed sound enough. As he approached the door, something caught his eye. Fresh scrapes in the dirt near the threshold, as if someone had recently passed through. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver at his hip, a habit born from too many years on the frontier. The door creaked open at his touch, hinges protesting years of disuse. William's nose twitched at an unexpected scent. Wood smoke, faint, but recent. Someone had lit a fire in this hearth, and not long ago. The failing daylight filtered through gaps in the roof, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. He stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The room was sparse. A few broken chairs, a rough-hewn table, and a stone fireplace that still held gray ashes. William lowered his saddlebag to the floor, the leather making a soft thud in the quiet space. A small sound, barely more than a whisper, came from behind one of the fallen chairs. William froze, years of hunting instincts taking over. Then he heard it again, the unmistakable sound of children trying to be quiet and failing. "Hello?" He called softly, keeping his voice gentle. "Anyone there?" For a moment, nothing moved. Then, like young deer emerging from cover, two small figures slowly stood up from behind the broken furniture. A boy and a girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, stood hand in hand. Their clothes were dirty and torn, their faces smudged with soot and grime. But it was their eyes that caught William's attention, large, dark, and filled with a desperate kind of hope. The girl's grip on her brother's hand tightened as she swallowed hard. "Are you our new daddy?" she whispered, her voice trembling like an aspen leaf in the wind. William stood rooted to the spot, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was seeing. These children were clearly half-starved, their cheeks hollow, and shoulders thin beneath their ragged clothes. The boy had a protective stance despite his obvious fear, slightly in front of his sister. Their hopeful expressions hit William like a physical blow, stirring something deep in his chest he thought had died years ago on the Buffalo Plains. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sound of their breathing and the distant call of an evening bird. William's hands, which had ended so many lives during his hunting days, hung uselessly at his sides as he stared at these two small, desperate souls who had somehow found their way into his inherited lodge, and perhaps into a place in his life he never expected to fill. William swallowed hard, his throat tight as he looked at the two small figures before him. "Come on out," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle like he would with spooked horses. "I've got some food here." Reaching slowly into his saddlebag, he pulled out a package wrapped in oilcloth. The children's eyes followed his every movement, their bodies tense with hunger and uncertainty. William unwrapped several strips of dried beef and a half loaf of trail bread, holding them out like an offering. Samuel moved first, tugging his sister Clara forward. Their bare feet made hardly a sound on the wooden floor as they crept closer. When they were within arm's reach, William knelt down, making himself less towering. "Here now," he said, tearing the bread in half. "Take it easy. There's plenty more." They snatched the food with trembling hands. William's chest tightened as he watched them devour the simple meal, barely stopping to breathe. Clara's thin fingers clutched the jerky like she feared it might disappear, while Samuel tried to maintain some dignity even as he stuffed bread into his mouth. "I'm William Hawley," he said quietly, once they'd slowed their desperate eating. "Can you tell me your names?" Clara swallowed her mouthful of bread. "I'm Clara," she whispered. "This is my brother Samuel. We're twins." William nodded, noting how Samuel's arm wrapped protectively around his sister's shoulders. "Where's your ma?" he asked, though something in their eyes told him he already knew the answer. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Samuel spoke up, his voice stronger than his sister's, but still wavering. "She got real sick. The fever took her 3 weeks ago." He pointed toward the back of the lodge. "We buried her out there, under the rocks, like she told us to. She said to wait here," Clara added, a tear tracking down her dirty cheek. "Said a man would come to look after us. Said the lodge would bring him." William's hands clenched involuntarily. These children had been surviving on their own for weeks, waiting for him. "What have you been eating?" he asked, already reaching for more food from his pack. "Roots mostly," Samuel answered. "Clara remembers which ones Ma showed us were safe, and we melted snow in Ma's pot before it got warm." The boys' matter-of-fact tone about their survival cut William deeper than any knife. He stood abruptly, moving to the hearth. "Let's get some warmth in here," he said gruffly, hiding the emotion in his voice. Soon, a small fire crackled in the fireplace. William wrapped his spare blankets around the twins' shoulders as they huddled close to the flames. In the flickering light, he could see how thin they truly were, how their clothes hung loose on their frames. When they finally dozed off, leaning against each other like young saplings after a storm, William stepped outside. The stars were bright overhead as he dropped to his knees in the dirt, something he hadn't done since he was a boy. "Lord," he whispered roughly, "I ain't asked you for much these past years." But these children, he trailed off, unable to find more words. The next morning's pale light found William examining the lodge more carefully. The children still slept, exhausted from their long ordeal. As he checked the hearth's condition, his boot caught on an uneven floorboard. Kneeling down, he noticed several boards beneath the hearth seemed looser than the others. Carefully, William pried up the warm planks. There, in a small space beneath the floor, lay a folded paper. He lifted it gently, the yellowed page crackling with age. Moving to where the morning light streamed through a gap in the shutters, he unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. As he read, his heart began to pound against his ribs. The letter was from the children's mother, her writing delicate but clear. She named him William Hall, as guardian of her children should anything happen to her. The pieces fell into place. Like a puzzle he hadn't known he was solving, his uncle's will, the inherited lodge, these waiting children. It hadn't been chance that brought him here. It had been planned. A small noise made him look up. Samuel and Clara stood watching him, their faces showing equal parts hope and fear. The letter trembled in William's weathered hands as their eyes met his. They were waiting, he realized, for yet another decision that would determine their fate. William looked down at the letter again, then back at the twins. Their mother's last wish and his uncle's careful planning had brought them together. Now, in this moment, everything hung in the balance. Their future, his chance at redemption, the possibility of becoming the family none of them had dared to hope for. William folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "Reckon we best get this place cleaned up," he said, his gruff voice gentler than before. The twins' faces lit up at his words, understanding their meaning. He would stay. Outside, the morning sun warmed the spring air as William buried the ashes from last night's fire in a pit behind the lodge. Samuel followed him like a shadow, carrying a small bucket with determined steps. Clara lingered in the doorway, her eyes tracking William's every movement as if afraid he might vanish. William stood back, hands on his hips, studying the lodge with a critical eye. The roof sagged dangerously on one side, wooden shingles missing in patches. Several shutters hung askew, creaking in the mountain breeze. Behind the building, the old well stood dry and useless, its rope frayed and bucket missing. "First things first," William said. "We need water." He grabbed 2 buckets from beside the door. "Creek's not far." "Samuel, you're strong enough to carry this small bucket?" Samuel's chest puffed up at the praise. "Yes, sir. I can carry lots." They made 3 trips to the creek, William showing them the safest path down the rocky slope. Clara stuck close, one hand always reaching for William's sleeve when the terrain grew steep. Each time she grabbed hold, his heart twisted a little more. "Don't fret none," he told her softly, covering her small hand with his calloused one. "I ain't going nowhere." Back at the lodge, William found some old oil paper in a trunk. He showed the twins how to patch a broken window, Samuel holding the paper straight while Clara helped smooth it down. The boy's face beamed with pride when the patch held firm. "Ma always said we needed to fix that," Samuel said, running his finger along the edge of their handiwork. "Said winter winds were too fierce up here." William nodded, something catching in his throat. These children had watched their mother struggle alone in this wilderness. Never again, he silently vowed. They spent the afternoon sweeping years of dust from the lodge's corners. Clara found an old broom that nearly dwarfed her, but she insisted on helping. William showed them how to lay dampened grass before sweeping to keep the dust down, a trick he'd learned in his drifting years. As dusk approached, William set about making supper. He hadn't much in his supplies, but he had beans and a precious few strips of bacon. The twins sat at the crude table, watching intently as he worked over the fireplace. "Ma told us stories while she cooked," Clara said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden tabletop. "She said a strong man would come one day." Samuel nodded eagerly. "She said he'd protect us, keep us safe from bad things." Said he'd be sent by the good Lord above, Clara added, her eyes serious in the fire to. William stirred the beans, his throat tight. These children had such faith, such trust. He wondered if they knew how much their words weighed on him. How? They bound him tighter than any rope could. After supper, William tucked them into bed, spreading his spare quilts over their thin frames. They fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the day's work, but with small smiles on their faces. William sat by the fire long after, watching the flames dance and thinking how his solitary life had changed in just 2 days. His future was no longer his alone. It belonged to these 2 small souls who trusted him so completely. The next morning, William was rolling up his sleeves to begin work on the roof when he heard hoofbeats approaching. His body tensed at the sound, old instincts kicking in. "Stay inside," he told the twins, grabbing his rifle before stepping out onto the porch. 3 riders approached through the morning mist. The man in front wore a fine coat despite the dusty trail, his horse better fed than his companions. The other 2 men flanked him like guards, their expressions hard beneath their hat brims. The well-dressed man reined his horse to a stop, looking down at William with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice smooth as creek. "Stones, I'm afraid there's been some mistake. This here land belongs to the mining syndicate." William's grip tightened on his rifle, though he kept it pointed at the ground. The man's smile widened slightly at the gesture. "Now, I'm sure we can come to some arrangement," the foreman continued. "But you should know, this property isn't free for squatting. Company's got plans for these hills." The foreman reached into his coat and pulled out a sheaf of papers, waving them like a flag. "These documents show clear title. Mining Syndicate owns everything from Timber Creek to Eagle's Ridge." His voice carried a smugness that made William's jaw tighten. "Got papers of my own," William said quietly, thinking of the guardian letter in his shirt pocket. "This lodge belonged to my uncle." The 2 rough men exchanged glances and laughed. "Listen to that squatter's courage," one sneered, adjusting his gun belt. The foreman's smile turned cold. "Law's simple out here, Mr. Hawley. Company wants you gone by week's end." He leaned forward in his saddle, lowering his voice. "Those children, orphan train heads east next month. Plenty of good Christian families back in Pennsylvania looking to adopt." William's finger twitched near his rifle's trigger. "You threatening children now?" "Just stating facts." The foreman straightened up, gathering his reins. "Think on it. Company don't like complications." With that, they wheeled their horses and rode down the trail, leaving dust and menace hanging in the air. William stood watching until they disappeared around the bend. A small sob broke the silence. He turned to find Clara in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Samuel stood beside her, fists clenched. "They ain't taking us nowhere," William said firmly, crossing to the twins. He knelt down, looking them both in the eye. "You hear me? Nobody's taking you from this lodge." Clara threw her arms around his neck, crying into his shoulder. Samuel pressed close, trying to be brave but trembling. William held them both, his resolve hardening like iron in a forge. These children were his responsibility now, his family. Once Clara's tears subsided, William set to work. He spent hours reinforcing the lodge's door with extra boards and stronger hinges from his saddlebag. Samuel helped gather stones to stack by the windows, while Clara sorted through the garden tools they'd found in the lean-to. "Gotta lay in firewood before winter comes," William explained as he swung the axe, showing Samuel how to stack the split logs. "Winter up here bites hard and long." By sunset, his shoulders ached, but a good pile of wood stood ready. The next morning, William saddled his horse for the ride into the valley. "Clara, you mind the lodge," he instructed. "Samuel, you're coming with me to the general store." Samuel's eyes lit up at being chosen. William lifted him into the saddle, then mounted behind him. The boy sat straight and proud as they descended the trail, asking questions about everything they passed. The general store's bell jingled as they entered. Conversations quieted. William felt the stares, heard the whispers. "Buffalo hunter?" someone muttered. "Drifter," said another. He kept his eyes forward, leading Samuel to the counter. "Flour, lamp oil, sugar if you got it," William told the storekeeper, who nodded curtly. As the man gathered their goods, the door opened again. A tall figure in a black coat entered, the circuit preacher, his Bible tucked under one arm. "William Hawley," the preacher said warmly, extending his hand. "I heard you'd settled up at the old lodge." His eyes fell kindly on Samuel. "And who might this fine young man be?" "Samuel, sir," the boy answered shyly. The preacher smiled. "Good biblical name, that. You know, we hold services every Sunday. Good place for children to learn scripture. Make friends." He looked at William. "Community's important up here in the Highlands." William nodded stiffly, paying for his goods. "Much obliged for the invitation," he said, though his tone remained guarded. The preacher's kindness seemed genuine, but William had learned the hard way about trusting too easily. They left town as the sun began its westward slide. Samuel clutched a small paper of candy the preacher had pressed into his hand. "He seemed nice," the boy ventured. "Reckon so," William answered, his thoughts elsewhere. Something about the creek caught his eye as they neared the lodge. The water level looked lower than yesterday. Down after getting Samuel inside, William walked upstream. About a quarter-mile up, he found what he feared, fresh boot prints in the mud. Newly placed rocks diverting water away from the channel that fed past his lodge. The mining company wasn't waiting for the law. They meant to drive him out by cutting off his water. William stood in the gathering dusk, anger burning in his chest. The company men had revealed their hand early, showing just how far they'd go. He'd have to be twice as vigilant now, watching for whatever else they might try. But as he walked back toward the warm light of the lodge, where Samuel and Clara waited, his determination only grew stronger. He'd fought harder battles than this, and now he had something worth fighting for. The morning sun had barely crested the ridge when William shouldered the empty buckets. "Time to fetch water," he called softly to the twins, who emerged sleepy-eyed from their blankets. "Can we help?" Samuel asked, already pulling on his boots. William nodded, handing him a small pail. 2-mile walk each way. Sure could use the company. Clara wrapped her shawl tight and grabbed another bucket. The three set out along the pine-needled path, frost still clinging to the shadows. Though the work was hard, the children's chatter made it lighter. Samuel spotted deer tracks and pointed out eagle nests, while Clara hummed her mother's songs. "Look there," Samuel called, racing ahead to a patch of late wildflowers. Clara followed, her laughter echoing through the trees. At the spring, William showed them how to dip the buckets without stirring up silt. The water ran crystal clear and cold. "This is good water," he said. "Worth the extra walk." The twins nodded seriously, understanding now why the mining company's creek tampering mattered so much. The return journey proved harder, water sloshing with each careful step. Clara's pace slowed, her breathing growing labored. By the time they reached the lodge, her cheeks were flushed despite the cool air. "You rest now," William told her, helping her onto her bed. She nodded weakly, a small cough shaking her shoulders. As evening approached, Clara's condition worsened. William heated broth over the fire, adding the last of their dried herbs. "Here now," he said, lifting her head gently. "Try to drink some." She managed a few sips before another coughing fit took hold. William piled quilts around her, his hands rough and clumsy with worry. He'd faced down buffalo stampedes and claimed jumpers, But this small girl's illness left him feeling utterly helpless. Samuel hovered nearby, his usual questions silenced by concern for his twin. The next morning, hoofbeats approached the lodge. William grabbed his rifle, but the rider who appeared was neither a mining company man nor stranger. Tall and straight-backed, the Ute man dismounted with fluid grace. "I am Manuel Red Elk," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I knew your uncle." He held up a freshly killed deer. "I bring food and news." William lowered his rifle, much obliged. "Come in." Manuel's eyes took in every detail of the lodge as he entered. He nodded at the twins, then laid the venison on the table. "Your uncle was fair man, respected boundaries." He glanced at Clara's bed, noting her flushed face. "The child is sick?" "Since yesterday," William answered. "Fever's rising." Manuel reached into his leather pouch and pulled out some dried leaves. "Pine needle tea, good for chest sickness." He moved to the hearth, showing William how to prepare it. While the tea steeped, Manuel led William outside. "Come, must show you something." They walked along the creek, Manuel pointing out old blazes on trees, stone cans half hidden by brush. "These are true boundaries. Your uncle and my people agreed. Mining company." He shook his head. "They'd push past markers, take more each season. This proof would help in court," William said. Manuel's face grew solemn. "White courts?" He paused. "They do not often hear native voice, but I will speak, if needed. Your uncle kept his word. His nephew must have same chance." Back at the lodge, they shared a meal of venison and potatoes. Samuel couldn't contain his curiosity about Manuel's bow, asking dozens of questions about hunting techniques. Manuel answered patiently, showing the boy how to test wind direction with a wet finger. Clara managed to sit up, sipping the pine needle tea. "Tastes like Christmas," she whispered, making Manuel smile. But as darkness fell, her cough grew deeper, rattling in her chest. William helped her lie down, fear gripping his heart as her breathing labored. Manuel gathered his things to leave. "I return tomorrow," he promised. "Bring more medicine." After the twins were settled, William knelt beside Clara's bed. Her small hand felt too warm in his calloused palm. Moonlight filtered through the oiled paper window, casting shadows on her pale face. For the first time in years, William bowed, his head in prayer. "Lord," he whispered, "I ain't been much for asking favors. Been too long carrying my own burdens. But this child," his voice caught, "she ain't done nothing to deserve suffering. If you're listening, help me save her, please." Clara stirred, coughing weakly. William squeezed her hand gently, continuing his vigil as the night deepened around them. Clara's fever raged through the night, her small body burning despite the cool claws William pressed to her forehead. By dawn, her breathing had grown shallow, each cough weaker than the last. William knew he couldn't wait any longer. "Manuel," he said to the Ute man who had stayed through the night, "can you watch over Samuel while I ride for medicine?" Manuel nodded solemnly. "The boy and I will tend the fire. Go swift." William knelt beside Samuel, who sat close to his sister's bed. "I need you to be strong, son. Help Manuel and keep Clara company till I return." "Yes, sir," Samuel whispered, his eyes wide with worry. The morning air bit sharp as William mounted his horse. Frost coated the trail, making the descent treacherous. He urged his mount carefully but quickly down the switchbacks, every moment aware of Clara's failing strength. The valley town was just stirring when he arrived, smoke rising from chimneys against the pale sky. William tied his horse outside the general store, his boots echoing on the wooden sidewalk as he strode toward the door. Mrs. Abernathy, the schoolteacher, was already inside, selecting supplies for her students. She turned at his entrance, noting his haggard expression. "Mr. Holly?" What's wrong? Clara's sick, he managed, his voice rough. Fever won't break. Understanding lit her face. Come with me. She moved purposefully through the store, selecting dried herbs and roots. Willow bark for the fever, she explained, measuring portions into paper packets. Horehound and mullein for the cough. And this, she reached for a jar of honey, to help the medicine go down easier. William watched her sure movements, grateful for her knowledge. Much obliged, Mom. Medicine isn't everything, Mr. Holly, she said softly, pressing the supplies into his hands. Prayer and loving care can work wonders. And you needn't bear this burden alone. That's what community is for. Her kind eyes reminded him of Clara's mother's letter, speaking of providence and faith. He nodded, unable to find words. The ride back seemed endless, though the sun had barely moved in the sky. When William finally pushed through the lodge door, he found Manuel seated by the fire, Samuel curled against his side as he spoke in his deep, measured voice. And so the eagle taught the people about courage, Manuel was saying, his hands moving in graceful gestures that captured Samuel's attention. Not the courage of fighting, but the courage of watching over others. William set to work immediately, brewing the herbs as Mrs. Abernathy had instructed. The bitter tea was sweetened with honey, and Clara managed small sips between coughs. Through the long afternoon and into the night, they took turns sitting with her, Manuel adding his own prayers in the ute, language to William's whispered words. Dawn was breaking when Clara's fever finally broke. William felt her forehead, cool at last beneath his rough palm, and something tight in his chest loosened. She opened her eyes, managing a weak smile. You stayed, she whispered. Of course I did, William replied, his voice gruff with emotion. Both twins reached for him then, their small arms circling his neck. He held them close, feeling their trust like a weight and a blessing. That Sunday, William kept his promise. He hitched the wagon, helped the twins into their cleanest clothes, and drove down to the Valley Church. The small white building seemed to glow in the morning light, its bell calling folks to worship. Whispers rustled like aspen leaves as William led Samuel and Clara to a pew. He felt the stares, knew what they must be thinking about the buffalo hunter turned guardian. But the twins' hands in his kept him steady. The circuit preacher stood to deliver his sermon, his weathered face kind as his eyes met William's. Today, he began, we speak of adoption into God's family, how the Lord takes us in, just as we are, and makes us his own. William felt the words sink deep, like rain into parched earth. He glanced down at Samuel and Clara, seeing how they belonged here, with him, as surely as if they'd been born to it. After the service, Mrs. Abernathy approached them, her smile warm. We're having a supper gathering next Sunday, she said. Welcome you all proper-like. The whole valley turns out for these suppers. Clara's face lit up at the word supper, while Samuel bounced on his toes. William looked at their eager expressions and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, simple and pure as a spring morning. We'll be there, he said, and meant it. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and fresh-cut wood as William worked steadily on the lodge's roof. Sunlight warmed his back while he hammered new shingles into place, replacing the rotted ones that had let in rain and snow. Below, Samuel's eager voice rang out. Pa, I found more nails. The boy hurried across the yard, clutching a rusty tin can filled with salvaged spikes. William smiled at the word pa that still caught him by surprise, but warmed his heart every time. Good work, son. Bring them up the ladder. Careful now. Samuel climbed slowly, concentrating on each rung. When he reached the top, William steadied him with a strong hand. Together they worked side by side, William showing him how to line up the shingles just right. Near the stone chimney, Clara sat in a patch of wild grass, weaving small branches into neat bundles for kindling. Her soft humming drifted up to them, a hymn she'd learned at church. The sound of her voice mixed with birdsong and the steady rhythm of hammering. Manuel Red Elk visited often during these weeks of repair, his tall figure appearing on the trail like a welcome shadow. He brought news from his travels along the boundaries, sharing meals and stories with the family. This afternoon, he helped William clear away the collapsed storage shed, his strong arms making quick work of the heavy beams. The mining men grow restless, Manuel warned as they stacked salvaged lumber. They speak of claims and rights, but their words carry anger. His dark eyes were serious beneath his wide-brimmed hat. William nodded, knowing Manuel's warnings were never idle. "We'll be ready," he said quietly, watching the twins play nearby. When the month drew to a close, William hitched the wagon for the Valley Church supper. Clara wore her best dress, freshly pressed, and Samuel had slicked down his unruly hair. With water. The evening air was sweet with early summer as they drove down the mountain trail. The church glowed with lamplight, its windows warm against the deepening dusk. Inside, long tables groaned under the weight of countless dishes: venison, stew, fresh bread, berry pie still warm from the oven. The twins' eyes grew wide at the sight. "Land sakes, if it isn't the Hawley family." Mrs. Abernathy's welcome rang true and warm. She guided them to seats, making sure the children had plenty of everything. "Clara, honey, try these sweet potatoes." And Samuel, "There's apple pie coming later." William watched in quiet amazement as the community embraced them. Farmers clapped him on the shoulder, their wives offered extra servings, and children invited Samuel and Clara to play. The preacher stopped by their table, his smile genuine. "You've found your calling, William," Mrs. Abernathy said softly, refilling his coffee cup. "Those children have brought out a steadiness in you that's plain to see." William ducked his head, touched by her words. "They've given me purpose," he admitted. "Something worth protecting." As darkness fell, William lifted the sleepy twins into the wagon. Clara curled against his shoulder, while Samuel fought to keep his eyes open. Still clutching a wrapped piece of pie Mrs. Abernathy had insisted they take home. The stars wheeled, bright and clear overhead as they climbed the mountain trail. William breathed in the peaceful night, feeling a contentment he'd thought lost forever. At the lodge, he carried the children to their beds, tucking quilts around their small forms. In the quiet main room, William knelt by the hearth. "Lord," he whispered, his rough voice soft with gratitude, "thank you for giving me these little ones, for making me a father when I least deserved it." The fire's glow reminded him of that first night, when two pairs of hopeful eyes had changed. His life forever. The peace of the moment shattered as hoofbeats thundered outside. William rose swiftly, his hand reaching for the rifle above the mantel. Torchlight flickered through the windows, casting strange shadows on the walls. The miners had returned. Clara's frightened voice called from the bedroom. "Papa?" "Stay inside," William ordered, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his gut. He moved toward the door, praying for strength to face whatever came next. Through the window, he counted at least 6 torches moving in the darkness. The miners had grown bold indeed, coming at night like thieves. William's hand tightened on his rifle as he prepared to defend his family and home. Torchlight cast wild shadows across the lodge's weathered walls as angry voices shattered the night's peace. The miners' shouts echoed against the mountainside, accusations flying like arrows through the darkness. "Come out, squatter." A fist hammered against the door. "You're trespassing on company land." William's jaw tightened as he moved toward the entrance, his rifle held low but ready. Behind him, Clara whimpered, and Samuel's small face appeared in the bedroom doorway, eyes wide with fear. "Stay inside," William ordered softly. "Both of you." He pulled open the heavy door and stepped onto the porch, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. 6 miners faced him, torches raised high, their faces twisted with contempt. Their leader, the foreman from before, sat astride a tall horse, sneering down at William. "This here's private property," the foreman spat. "You've been warned." William stood his ground, voice steady. "I have a legal claim to this lodge. My uncle's will. Your claims mean nothing." Another miner stepped forward, brandishing a piece of paper. "We've got company deeds." The sound of approaching horses cut through the confrontation. William's heart sank as he recognized the glint of tin stars in the torchlight. 3 deputies rode up, their expressions grim. The lead deputy dismounted, spurs jingling against the packed earth. "William Hawley," he announced formally, "you're under arrest for unlawful occupation of mine company property." "No!" Clara burst through the door, her nightgown pale in the darkness. She wrapped her arms around William's leg, tears streaming down her face. "You can't take him." Samuel charged out behind her. "He's our pa now." The boy shouted, fists clenched. "Leave him alone." William's throat tightened as the deputies approached with iron shackles. "Please," he said quietly, "let me say goodbye to my children." The lead deputy hesitated, then nodded curtly. William knelt, gathering the twins close. Clara's small body shook with sobs while Samuel tried to look brave, though his chin trembled. "I'll come back for you," William whispered fiercely. "I promise. Be strong for me." The deputies pulled him away, cold iron closing around his wrists. Clara's scream pierced the night as they dragged William toward their horses. His own mount, the faithful bay that had carried him to this mountain, was seized as evidence. "What? About the young'uns?" one deputy asked, nodding toward the twins. "They'll need to go to proper authorities," the lead deputy replied. "Can't leave them alone up here." 2 deputies approached the children. Clara fought like a wild thing as they lifted her, while Samuel kicked and shouted. William struggled against his bonds, his heart breaking at their cries. From the shadows of the pines, a tall figure watched. Manuel Red Elk's eyes narrowed as he witnessed the scene unfold. Silent as a shadow, he melted back into the forest, following the group as they descended the mountain trail. The county jail was a cold stone building that smelled of despair and old straw. William sat on the hard bunk, his head bowed in prayer, though the words tasted bitter in his mouth. Everything he'd built, everything he'd become since finding the twins, seemed to crumble like ashes. "Lord," he whispered roughly, "I thought you were giving me a chance at redemption. But maybe my past sins are too great." He thought of his years as a buffalo hunter, the violence of his former life. "Those children deserve better than a man like me." Across town, in a stern boarding house run by the preacher's sister, Clara, and Samuel huddled together on a narrow bed. The woman had told them they would stay only until arrangements could be made for the orphan train heading east. "But we're not orphans," Samuel had protested. "We have a pa." The woman had only clicked her tongue sympathetically and left them alone in the cold room. Clara buried her face in the thin pillow, her tears soaking the fabric. "You promised," she whispered, remembering William's strong hands and gentle voice. "You promised not to leave us." Samuel wrapped his arm around his sister, trying to be brave like William had taught him. But his own tears fell silently in the darkness as he wondered if they would ever see their new father again. Outside the boarding house window, a shadow moved. Manuel Red Elk studied the building carefully, noting every entrance and exit. His people understood the importance of family bonds, not just of blood, but of the heart. He would not let these bonds be broken by white men's greed. Night grew deeper, and a cold wind swept down from the mountains. In 3 different places, jail, boarding house, and forest prayers rose up for justice, for family, and for the strength to endure whatever morning might bring. The county jail's stone walls pressed close around William, each day blending into the next like muddy water. His only companions were the mice that scurried across the floor at night, and the endless parade of his own dark memories dot in the dim light of his cell. Ghosts from his past circled like vultures. He remembered the crack of his rifle, the thunder, a falling buffalo, the faces of men who died in range disputes. Their eyes haunted him now, accusing and cold. But worse than these were the fresh wounds, Clara's screams as they dragged him away, Samuel's brave face crumbling into tears. William paced the narrow space, 7 steps forward, 7 steps back. The children would think he'd abandoned them, just like everyone else in their young lives. The thought twisted in his gut like a knife. He'd promised to protect them, to be their father. Now they faced the orphan train, that iron snake that would carry them east to strangers' homes. The evening sun cast long shadows through the barred window when boots echoed down the corridor. William looked up to see Manuel Red Elk's tall figure approaching, the circuit preacher beside him. Their faces were grave but determined. "Brother William," the preacher said softly, gripping the iron bars. "We've learned what's happening." Manuel nodded, his dark eyes sharp with anger. "The mining company has paid officials to rush through their claim. They seek to move quickly, before truth can be heard." William's hands clenched. More corruption, more greed. The story of the frontier written in broken promises and stolen land. "What about the children?" "They're safe for now," the preacher assured him. "My sister watches them at the boarding house. But the company pushes for a quick resolution. They've arranged a county hearing in 3 days." Manuel reached into his leather vest and withdrew several folded papers. "I have kept these many years," he said, spreading them carefully on the narrow shelf that served as a table. "Boundary maps, marked by your uncle and my father when the first treaties were made. They show true lines of the land." William studied the careful drawings, hope stirring faintly. "Will white courts listen to native testimony?" "They must," the preacher said firmly. "These are official documents, witnessed and sealed. The mining company has overstepped their claim by half a mile. The lodge and its land belong to you, William." William turned away, pressing his forehead against the cool stone wall. "Maybe this is God's judgment," he whispered. "For all the lives I took, all the promises I broke in my younger days. Perhaps I don't deserve those children." "No," the preacher's voice cracked like summer thunder. "That's pride talking, William. Pride wearing the mask of humility. Who are you to say God's grace isn't big enough to redeem your past?" Manuel's quiet voice added, "The Great Spirit does not give children to those who cannot love them. I saw how they bloomed under your care, like flowers after rain." William's shoulders shook as he fought back tears. "I dream of them every night," he admitted, "on that train, heading east. Their little faces pressed against the window glass, watching the mountains disappear, watching their home vanish forever." The preacher reached through the bars, gripping William's shoulder. "Then fight for them. Not for land or pride or revenge. Fight for their future." "The hearing will not be easy," Manuel warned. "But you do. Not stand alone. My people remember your uncle's kindness. We will speak truth before any judge who will listen." William turned back to face them, drawing a deep breath. The crushing weight of despair began to lift, replaced by something stronger determination. He thought of Samuel's eager help with chores, Clara's trusting arms around his neck at bedtime. They had chosen him as their father. He would choose them again and again. "Thank you," he said roughly. "Both of you. I've lived too long thinking I had to carry everything alone." The preacher smiled. "That's what community means, William. We bear one another's burdens." As darkness fell, his visitors departed. William lay on his thin bunk, but sleep brought no peace. The dream came again, the train pulling away, the twins' faces growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared like stars at dawn. But this time, when he woke, determination replaced despair. He rose as the first light crept through his window. The mountains stood purple against the pale sky, solid as God's promises. William knelt beside his bunk, praying not for himself, but for strength to fight for his children's future. The path ahead would not be easy, but he was no longer walking it alone. Whatever the mining company threw at him, whatever shadows his past cast, he would face them. Not for land or pride, but for two small hearts that had claimed him as their own. In that cold cell, William Haw made a new promise, not just to the children, but to God and himself. He would become the father they believed him to be. The county courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its weathered boards creaking in the mountain wind. Inside, lamplight cast wavering shadows across rough-hewn benches packed with townsfolk. Their whispers echoed off the high ceiling like rustling leaves. William stood straight-backed between two deputies, his wrists bound, but his head held high. His heart clenched when he spotted Samuel and Clara seated beside Mrs. Abernathy in the front row. Clara's eyes brimmed with tears, while Samuel's small fists were clenched tight in his lap. William ached to go to them, to gather them close and promise everything would be all right. The mining foreman lounged at the plaintiff's table, his fancy vest stretched tight across his belly. A smirk played at the corners of his mouth as he sorted through a stack of official-looking papers. The sight made William's blood boil, but he forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about family. Judge Harrison entered, his black robe swishing as he took his seat behind the elevated desk. The room fell silent, except for the persistent draft whistling through window frames. "Present your case," the judge commanded, nodding to the mining foreman. The foreman rose smoothly, brandishing his documents. "Your Honor, these deeds clearly show the mining company's claim extends fully 2 miles beyond the disputed lodge." He approached the bench, laying out papers with flourishing confidence. "The defendant is nothing more than a squatter, using orphan children to play on sympathies." William's hands tightened into fists at the insult, but before he could speak, Manuel Red Elk stood from his place near the back. The tall youth's presence commanded attention as he moved forward, carrying a worn leather map case. "I must speak," Manuel said, his voice steady and clear. "I was there when these boundaries were marked, 25 years ago. William Hale's uncle and my father placed the stones together." The judge's eyes narrowed. "And you expect this court to take the word of a native over proper documentation?" A ripple of mutters ran through the crowd. Manuel remained dignified, spreading his carefully preserved maps across the judge's desk. "These are the original survey markers, drawn by government hands. See here the creek bend, a lightning-struck pine, the three-pointed rock. All match exactly. The mining company's new claims reach half a mile beyond their right." The foreman's face darkened. "Surely you won't accept such testimony, Your Honor? These people have no standing in. I will speak." Mrs. Abernathy's voice rang out as she rose from her seat. The twins pressed close to her skirts as she faced the judge. "I've watched William Hawley these past months. The man who first rode into our valley was indeed rough-edged, carrying old shadows. But love for these children has transformed him." She placed a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. He nursed Clara through fever, taught Samuel to split kindling safely. He brings them to church, ensures they're fed and clothed and schooled. I've seen him kneeling by their beds at night, praying over them. That's not the action of a squatter, Your Honor. That's the devotion of a true father." Clara broke free suddenly, running to William despite the deputy's attempt to stop her. "Please don't send us away," she cried, clinging to his legs. "We want to stay with Pa." The room fell silent at her words. Even the judge seemed moved, though he quickly masked it with a stern cough. The circuit preacher stood then, pulling a folded paper from his Bible. "There is one more piece of evidence, Your Honor. The children's mother left this letter, naming William Hawley as guardian should anything happen to her. It was found beneath the lodge's floorboards." He handed the brittle paper to the judge, who adjusted his spectacles to read it carefully. The mining foreman shifted uneasily, his confidence cracking. For long moments, the only sound was the wind mourning through the eaves. William held his breath, feeling the weight of Clara against his legs, seeing Samuel's desperate hope across the room. Everything that mattered hung on the judge's next words. Finally, Judge Harrison set down the letter and removed his spectacles. "The mining company's claim is void," he declared. "Their documents show signs of recent alteration, while these survey maps are clearly original. Furthermore, the matter of the children's guardianship was legally established by their mothers. Written wishes." He fixed William with a stern gaze. "The lodge and land are yours, Mr. Hawley, as is the sacred duty of raising these little ones. Do not make me regret this decision." Relief surged through the room like a spring flood. Samuel ran to join his sister, both children wrapping themselves around William. As the deputies removed his shackles, Mrs. Abernathy dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief while the preacher clasped Manuel's shoulder in gratitude. The mining foreman stormed out, slamming the courthouse door behind him. But William barely noticed, too busy gathering his children close, breathing in the sweet scent of their hair, feeling their small hearts beating against his chest. They were truly his at last. No more fear of separation, no more nights of anxious prayer in a jail cell. God had given him a second chance at life, and he meant to live it well. William burst through the courthouse doors, his boots thundering on the wooden steps. The bitter wind whipped his face as panic seized his chest. The deputies had already sent Samuel and Clara ahead to the depot, not bothering to wait for the judge's ruling. "William!" Manuel Red Elk's voice cut through the swirling snow. He led his painted mare forward, her breath steaming in the cold air. "Take my horse. She knows the way to the station better than yours." William gripped Manuel's shoulder in wordless gratitude, swinging into the saddle. The mare danced beneath him, sensing his urgency. Manuel vaulted up behind him, and William dug his heels into the horse's flanks. They galloped past startled townspeople, hooves clattering on the frozen ground. The depot lay 5 miles ahead, over 2 icy ridges. William's heart hammered against his ribs as he thought of his children being forced onto that train, believing he had abandoned them again. "Lord, please," he prayed aloud, his words carried away by the wind. "Don't let me lose them now." The mare's powerful strides ate up the distance as they climbed the first ridge. Snow flurries stung William's face, and his fingers grew numb on the reins. Manuel pressed close behind him, helping to guide the horse along treacherous patches of ice. "There," Manuel pointed as they crested the second ridge. Far below, smoke billowed from a waiting locomotive, dark against the winter sky. The sight sent fresh fear coursing through William's veins. "Faster," he urged the horse. She responded gallantly, picking her way down the steep trail with sure feet despite her lathered flanks. William could make out figures moving on the platform, now men in dark uniforms herding small shapes toward the passenger cars. The last half-mile seemed endless. William's throat was raw from calling encouragement to the tired horse. He could hear the train's whistle now, shrill and impatient. Through the swirling snow, he spotted 2 small figures clutching each other on the platform, Samuel and Clara, huddled together as a conductor tried to usher them toward the steps. "Samuel! Clara!" William's shout carried across the yard. The twins' heads snapped up at the sound of his voice. The mare's hooves struck wooden planks as they thundered onto the platform. William leaped from the saddle before she fully stopped, stumbling forward as his numb legs hit the boards. Stop! Those are my children. Pa! Clara's cry pierced his heart. She tried to run to him, but the conductor held her arm. Sir, these orphans are bound for proper homes back east, the man said, firmly. We have our orders. William pulled the judge's written ruling from his coat with trembling fingers. The court just awarded me full guardianship. They're not going anywhere. The conductor frowned, studying the paper while Samuel and Clara strained toward William, their faces wet with tears. Finally, the man nodded reluctantly and released his hold on Clara's arm. The twins flew into William's arms. He dropped to his knees, gathering them close as they sobbed against his chest. Their small bodies shook with cold and fear, and he wrapped his coat around them both. You came, Samuel choked out. We thought, I'll always come for you, William whispered fiercely. Always. You're my family now, and nothing will change that. Manuel appeared beside them, leading his tired mare. Snow dusted his shoulders as he smiled down at the reunion. The train whistle shrieked again, and Clara flinched, pressing closer to William. It's all right, little one, William soothed, running a rough hand over her hair. That train's not for you anymore. We're going home. He stood, keeping an arm around each child. Their legs trembled with exhaustion and relief, but their faces shone with joy as they looked up at him. William nodded gratefully to Manuel, who had already arranged for a wagon to carry them back to town. As they climbed into the wagon's bed, the train pulled away from the station in a cloud of steam and coal smoke. William held his children close, feeling their hearts beating against his sides. The snow was falling harder now, but he had never felt warmer. Manuel clucked to his horse, turning the wagon toward home. William watched his children's faces, memorizing every detail. Samuel's determined little chin, Clara's trusting eyes. They were his to protect now, his to raise and love. The thought filled his heart near to bursting. The depot disappeared behind them as they wound their way back up the ridge. Clara began to hum softly, a tune their mother had taught them. Samuel joined in, and soon their sweet voices rose above the creak of wagon wheels, carried on the winter wind like a prayer of thanksgiving. William charged forward across the platform, his boots thundering against the wooden planks. Two deputies stood between him and the children, their hands hovering near their gun belts. Stand aside. William's voice carried over the locomotive's hiss. Those are my children. Pa! Samuel and Clara screamed in unison, their voices piercing. Through the station's chaos, the deputies exchanged uncertain glances as William shouldered past them. The twins broke free from the matron trying to hold them back, running toward him with their arms outstretched. William dropped to one knee, catching them both as they crashed into his chest. Clara's tears soaked his shirt as she clung to him. Samuel's small fingers dug into William's coat so tightly his knuckles went white. The platform seemed to fade away as William held them, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. You came back, Clara whispered against his chest. I knew you would come. A horse's hooves clattered on the wooden platform as a courier from the courthouse galloped up, waving a paper. Judge's ruling, he shouted, breathing hard. The children are to remain with William Hawley. He's their legal guardian. A murmur rippled through the crowd of townspeople who had gathered to witness the scene. Mrs. Abernathy stepped forward, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The preacher nodded in approval, his hand resting on his Bible. The deputies backed away, holstering their weapons. More townspeople pressed closer, their faces showing relief and joy. William felt the weight of their acceptance wrap around him like a warm blanket. That's our daddy, Samuel announced proudly, his voice ringing across the platform. His chest puffed out as he looked at the gathered crowd, daring anyone to challenge this truth. The mining foreman sat atop his horse at the edge of the platform, his face twisted with fury. "This ain't over, Holly," he spat, wheeling his mount around. His horse's hooves struck sparks from the stones as he galloped away, leaving only bitter words hanging in the cold air. William paid him no mind. He knelt fully on the platform boards, gathering the twins closer. Their small bodies trembled against him, whether from cold or emotion he couldn't tell. The steam whistle shrieked above them, making Clara flinch. "Listen to me, both of you," William said, his voice rough with feeling. He pulled back just enough to look into their faces. Clara's tear-stained cheeks, Samuel's determined expression. "I promise you, right here before God and everyone, I will never leave you again. Never." Clara's fingers twisted in his shirt. "Promise?" she whispered. "I promise with all my heart," William said firmly. He touched her chin gently, lifting her face to meet his eyes. "You're my children now, truly and legally. Nothing will change that." Samuel wrapped his arms around William's neck. "We knew you'd come fight for us, Pa. You're the bravest man in the whole territory." The train whistle sounded again, longer this time. William held his children tighter as the great iron wheels began to turn, steam billowing around them. The passenger cars that would have carried his children away rolled past, gathering speed until they disappeared around the bend, taking that threat with them. Manuel appeared beside them, leading his tired Mari. "The wagon is ready," he said quietly. "Time to take your family home, my friend." The crowd parted as William stood, lifting both children into his arms. Though they were getting too big to carry, he couldn't bear to let them walk just yet. Clara rested her head on his shoulder, while Samuel kept one arm firmly around his neck. As if afraid to let go, Mrs. Abernathy stepped forward, pressing a warm loaf of bread wrapped in cloth into Clara's hands. "Welcome home, children," she said softly. "Welcome home, William." The preacher raised his hand in blessing as they passed. Other townspeople reached out to pat William's shoulder or touch the children's hands. Their smiles and murmured congratulations wrapped around the small family like a protective embrace. William carried his precious burden toward the waiting wagon, his heart so full it felt near to bursting. The twins' combined weight in his arms felt like an anchor, grounding him to this new life he'd been given. No more drifting, no more running from his past. He had found his future in these two small souls who trusted him so completely. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds as Manuel helped them into the wagon bed. Its golden light caught the tears on Clara's cheeks, making them shine like diamonds. Samuel sat up straight and proud beside his sister, one hand still gripping William's sleeve. As Manuel clucked to his horse and the wagon began to move, William gathered his children close against the cooling air. The depot fell away behind them, and with it, the last shadows of doubt about his path forward. He was no longer just William Hawley, former buffalo hunter and drifter. He was something far greater now. He was their father. The wagon rolled into the valley as the sun climbed high. Neighbors spotted them coming and emerged from their homes, waving and calling out welcomes. William's heart swelled at the unexpected greeting. "Look, Pa." Samuel pointed excitedly. "Mrs. Abernathy's got books." Sure enough, the schoolteacher stood waiting with a stack of worn readers tucked under her arm. Clara's eyes lit up at the sight. Other townsfolk appeared carrying baskets of food, tools, and supplies. "We aim to get you properly settled," the preacher announced, stepping forward with a hammer in hand. "Manuel's already up at the lodge, working on that creek situation." William climbed down from the wagon, helping the twins after him. "I'm much obliged," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I can't ask folks to—" "You're not asking," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted gently. "We're offering. That's what neighbors do." Throughout the afternoon, the lodge buzzed with activity. Men climbed onto the roof, replacing broken shingles and reinforcing weak spots. Women organized the interior, hanging curtains and setting up a proper kitchen. Manuel had indeed restored the creek's flow, the water running clear and strong once more. The children darted among the workers, Samuel proudly carrying nails to the men building the new shed, Clara helping arrange her new books on a freshly built shelf. Their laughter rang out across the clearing, no longer shadowed by fear. As evening approached, lanterns were lit and tables set up outside. The aroma of stew and fresh bread filled the air. William watched his children sitting among new friends, their faces glowing in the lamplight. His past life of violence and loneliness seemed to fade like mist in morning sun. Standing before the gathered community, William's voice shook slightly. "I want to thank each one of you," he said. "Not just for the work today, but for showing us what it means to be home." The preacher nodded, understanding in his eyes. The Lord works in mysterious ways, bringing the lost into his family. Clara leaned against William's side, and Samuel grabbed his hand. Around them, neighbors smiled warmly, sharing in their joy. For the first time in his life, William felt truly anchored, his heart at peace. The first snowfall of winter draped the valley in pristine white. Inside the lodge, warmth radiated from the newly repaired hearth, where a robust fire crackled. Lamplight gleamed through proper glass windows, replacing the oiled paper that had once covered the broken panes. The sound of children's laughter echoed off the sturdy walls. Manuel Red Elk sat at the rough-hewn table, his weathered hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee. His deep voice carried through the room as he shared tales of his people's wisdom, while Samuel and Clara listened with wide eyes. The snow fell in gentle waves outside, dusting the windowsills with white. "And so the eagle taught the people about courage," Manuel concluded, nodding at Samuel, who had edged closer with each word. William ladled out bowls of steaming stew, the rich aroma filling the cabin. They ate together, sharing bread and stories, until the dishes were cleared away. The evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket. "Time for prayers," William said softly, and the twins scrambled to kneel beside him near the hearth, their small hands clasped in his large, calloused ones as they bowed their heads. William's voice, once used for harsh commands, now lifted in gentle thanksgiving for family restored, justice served, and mercy given. After tucking Samuel and Clara into their beds, William stepped out onto the porch. The night sky stretched vast above him, stars piercing the darkness like diamonds scattered on velvet. His breath fogged in the cold air as he stood, feeling the weight of years of wandering finally lift from his shoulders. Peace settled deep in his bones. Back inside, he moved quietly to check on the children. He bent to kiss each small forehead, his heart full to bursting. Clara stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "You really are a daddy now," she whispered sleepily. William's throat tightened with emotion. "Yes, I reckon I am." He settled into his chair by the fire, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing, mixing with the pop and crackle of burning wood. The warmth of belonging wrapped around him like an embrace. "Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.